Hello guys, and welcome back to Relevant Founders, brought to you by Relevant Software. Relevant is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers world-class products for Fortune 500 companies and promising startups. Today on this episode, we have with us Peter Bendor-Samuel, CEO of the Everest Group, and Anna Dziuba, VP of Delivery at Relevant Software. We're going to discuss the survival of the Ukrainian IT industry 100 days into the war. So today, guys, we have a different topic which we are going to touch upon, and it's the survival of the Ukrainian IT sector 100 days into the war. So the war in Ukraine has been ongoing for almost 100 days. It's already impacted the IT sector on both a local and global scale. Life has been turned upside down. More than 14 million people have fled their homes since Russia's invasions of Ukraine. More than 6 million have left for neighboring countries, while 8 million people are displaced inside the war-torn country itself. The IT industry has been hit hard. It was booming as exports rose by 36% from 5 billion to 6.8 billion in 2021. The IT army rose from 244,000 to 285,000. Amazon, BlaBlaCar, and many others opened their offices in 2021 in Ukraine. And although maybe once recognized as a location for cheap labor, it is no longer considered this way, but a location for high-level engineers carrying out difficult tasks. And so, guys, I would like to introduce our guest speakers for this topic today. So we've got Peter Bendor-Samuel, CEO of Everest Group, and Anna Dziuba, and I hope I pronounced your name correct there, VP of Delivery at Relevant Software. So Peter's years of experience tackling some of the biggest challenges disrupting the industry, and Anna's intimate understanding of the Ukrainian IT landscape will make sure for an information-packed discussion. So guys, what we're going to do, I'm just going to throw some questions out at you, and it'd be really interesting to see both of your opinions and if you agree, disagree, and just let's see where the Ukrainian IT sector is moving and basically where the whole kind of the economy is going because of the influence of the war and what it's doing to the economy. So question number one, what has been the reasons for Ukraine's IT's industry for being so successful? Obviously, you've got the government's approach to kind of minimum red tape, the professionalism of Ukraine's IT specialists. What else?
So I've been basically in IT and in outsourcing since the previous recession, let's name it like this, crisis, 2008. And basically from what I've seen and noticed that Ukrainian IT and Ukrainian engineers in general, they always were and still they are on age between low price but European and closer to European mindset. So they respect client, respect time. They deliver way better than a lot of other outsourcing areas. We have very strong tech school, like in general, not only schools, but universities. We still have very high level of expertise in those facilities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So as for me, those are main factors. And this is why a lot of clients choosing Ukrainian engineers.
Mm-hmm. You know, I actually got told the other day that one of the main things that Ukrainian engineers do is generally they start all projects on no. When someone gives them a proposal, they say, we're not sure we can do it. And then they work towards yes. So obviously working through the problems, the pain points, and getting to a more realistic kind of area to start with. Peter, what about yourself? What do you think here? Why has Ukraine been so successful with its IT industry?
Well, first we have to look at the overall demand for engineering worldwide. And we're in a worldwide shortage. And that shortage looks like it's going to continue for the foreseeable future. So Ukraine's moving, filling a void. And quite frankly, if there's quality engineering talent anywhere in the world, it is desirable. Now, as was previously stated, Ukraine's well-positioned, great education, strong engineering mindset. Mm-hmm. So very much come at this from an engineering perspective, strong math, and consequently, have a very high quality labor pool. Another thing about the labor pool, which is very attractive, is it's persistent. You see there's a lot of loyalty. They stay with the firms. And so if you're retaining a Ukrainian-based dev team, you're likely to have the same dev team over time, or most of it. Whereas in other places, you have a lot more churn and a lot more turnover. So very high quality, global shortage, and also persistent teams all make for a very attractive recipe.
Lisa, where do you think this persistence comes from? Why are they so dedicated to their teams?
I think it comes probably a little bit out of the culture. You don't have quite as an aggressive poaching culture in Ukraine as you do, say, in India. I think proximity was another issue, which is it's better time zone than some of the other places in the world, and good language skills certainly for Europe, and so another set of attractive attributes. But probably back to the culture, as you pointed out, to it's a conservative culture. They tend to not want to overstate what they can do, and that comes back to they seem to be more committed to staying with the same team. And I think another aspect is that it has been blessed with good investments. I think people have come and tried to reinforce that, whether it's startups in Ukraine or other firms coming in and taking advantage of the great labor pool.
Okay, so this leads me on to my next question. So obviously there, Peter, you said about obviously language skills, obviously proximity as well. It's pretty much in the time zone of most European kind of countries. It's not so you wake up and they're 7 hours ahead. Yeah. So Anna, why do businesses come to Ukraine for outsourcing? So obviously you've got the language skills, you've got the dedication. What else? Why do they come to Ukraine for the outsourcing?
I still believe that, like, up to this days, that the whole the main factor of choosing any partner is loyalty and references. So the more clients we have, the more we get every year. That's like exponential growth.
Mm-hmm.
So as for me, still, and like even 10 years before and right now, I believe the only thing what matters is that we're doing good things and doing it constantly, even though services getting more expensive, but loyalty, that's what matters.
So loyalty there. Peter, what about you? What do you think? And also, let's put this a little bit further. Do you think companies are going to still come and, look to Ukraine for outsourcing now during the war and in the future?
Just clearly, I think, just commenting on previous comment, Ukraine and the firms within Ukraine have built an amazing reputation, a well-earned reputation, and that attracts more work. And we're seeing the benefit of that now with this huge disruption, right? Many Ukrainian firms are struggling to deliver in this current environment, yet we're seeing a lot of loyalty from customers staying with them or wanting to stay with them, which is really quite remarkable given the important things they're doing and the need that is difficult for them to often deliver against that. So it really is remarkable, and now that can't last forever, right? And to some degree, now what's interesting is many of these Ukrainian firms are managing to shift operations either into parts of Ukraine which are less war-torn and with good telecommunications in place, thanks to Starlink and other vehicles, they're able to do that. And also with the diaspora, they're able to stand up operations elsewhere. That said, this is going to be a continuing issue, and if this war drags on for, let's say, years, I think it will likely have a very negative effect on Ukraine's ability. But back to the point I made to start with, the world is in a dramatic shortage of heavy-duty engineering capability. And if you have that, the world will come to you. And Ukraine has that, and likely will again after this war is finished. The demand that's building for engineering skills looks like it's going to outstrip our ability to stand up new supply. So I think the favorable demand situation is likely that whatever happens in this war, as long as it's part of the West and not doesn't become part of Russia, where likely it will be impossible to do business, Ukraine's well positioned.
Is there anything Ukrainian outsourcing companies and Ukrainian IT companies can do over the next few years to keep building that talent, building the amount of engineers they've got?
Look, as I said, there's a shortage of engineers, and it turns out that there's a huge diaspora. So to the extent that Ukraine can deliver within Ukraine, that's great. Can the Ukrainian firms also deliver outside? And there's a diaspora of both Russian and Belarus engineers that are seeking to leave their countries because they will not be able to participate in the global supply chain going forward. And so I think the Ukrainian firms could supplement their losses. You know, the young men are often being called up into the armed forces. They may be able to attract some of the Russian and Belarus engineers who wish to leave their countries and potentially offset some of the losses they have to the armed forces who are defending their country right now. So that there are avenues for, I think, the Ukrainian firms to build on, take advantage of the situation, or at least minimize the situation, the losses in the situation going forward. So I don't think all is lost for Ukrainian capability. And as I said, once this goes forward, there is highly likely to be an ongoing shortage, and the quality of the Ukrainian engineering is superb. So people will find that attractive.
Yeah, so, Peter, I have a question too, and it's like I'm interested in that one in general. So, is it really important? How do you think for end clients? Is it really important for engineers to have like official kind of education, like degree from university, or maybe the possible future for Ukraine is setting up a lot of private universities or courses as a part of big outsourcing companies? Because after the war, we'll have a lot of people who will have no more jobs and they will need to get another profession, how it happened during the Second World War in US, for example. So what do you think about this possible solution?
The thing about technology is it's really about capability less than degrees. So if you have proven capability, so boot camps and retraining are very useful. The problem is they get you started, you've got to get the experience, right? Now, the existing cohorts of Ukrainian engineers give a great environment to apprentice new people coming in, right? So, you know, most people are less interested after 5 years of where you graduated from and more what have you done and what can you demonstrate. So I think there is a path. In fact, it's not just for Ukraine. Boot camps are a big thing everywhere in the world right now for the retraining of diaspora. Again, those work well if they're grounded in solid education. You can't take an uneducated person and retrain them into technology, particularly someone who doesn't have math skills and STEM skills. But if you have those raw ability to think and operate, then the actual university, the boot camps or the private universities, in fact, if you look at what, say, for example, the big outsourcing firms are doing in India, they're often taking now students from marginal universities or much less well accredited and retraining them, you know, in these big or training them rather in these big facilities. And there's no reason why that couldn't be implemented in the Ukraine as well.
Here you mentioned about like even multiple times about shortages. I also read about it like even yesterday on TechCrunch that just in May, tech companies lay off more than 15,000 of employees in, I believe, in general. So how long? Huh?
So how do you square that? Well, first of all, they're not laying off engineering. Okay. So,
I'd like to ask you, for how long are you seeing this tendency will be? How long will it be, and when it's going to get to engineers?
So you know, I think fundamentally you're asking, there's a looming recession, global recession, right? Probability of that recession is growing, and the probability that will be a hard recession is also increasing. So the fundamental question you're saying is, you know, what's going to happen coming into the recession? You're right that the tech stocks have taken a big hit. So the venture capital is getting more expensive, and the VC-driven firms are under more pressure to perform, right, than they were before. It's not just all about growth; they have to perform otherwise. But from a tech right now, they tend. I don't think anyone in their right mind is laying off engineering. Okay, there's this, you lay off marketing, you lay off other things. Those dev teams are precious, and those DevOps teams are precious, and they're still in short demand. But tech is not the whole market. Every firm in the world is in the process of becoming a tech company. And that's what's driving this demand, right? So as we look forward, we believe that we're likely to be in a situation where even in a recession, there will continue to be a shortage or a demand for tech resources because of this underlying secular trend we just talked about every firm putting in growth platforms, tech platforms to try and to digitize digital transformation going forward. And that demand is still building out there. So we're going to be in a interesting, what that will likely create is some form of hyper stagflation, where tech wages continue to rise, where overall economy is not doing so well. That said, the demand, any deep recession will impact demand, and there will be less demand than there was before. But I think we're going to move from 30 knots of wind in our sails down to maybe 10 knots of wind in our sails. Okay, so the momentum will slow, but it's very hard to see how we're going to have mass layoffs of engineering worldwide, given the underlying build, particularly for the kind of deep technical expertise that is often found in Ukraine. Think of the world as bifurcating into deep engineering and light IT, low code, right? And those two, that sort of the engineering and low code are both happening. You think they would be in competition. Actually, the more low code you do, the more deep engineering you need, because you've got to have things that really work and work at volume. And so at this time, we believe that the demand for deep engineering is going to be continue even into a large recession, although the demand may lessen or abate for a short period of time, but definitely in the middle of a mega trend.
There aren't many, but there are some tech companies that say from the West looking for engineers, are looking to outsource. There is obviously this hesitation of still going to Ukraine. Obviously, there's a war, there's uncertainty, there's tech companies that are really have to be really careful with the data and cyber security. If you guys were a CEO of a Western tech company and you were looking to outsource right now, would you go to Ukraine?
I probably wouldn't put new dev teams into Ukraine. Many tech firms right now have contracts with Ukrainian service providers, right? Or their own captives, their own organizations there. So those are continuing. New capacity, you'll look first elsewhere, given the systematic risk that is currently evident in the Ukrainian market. That's not to say you won't have growth, because these existing contracts, you might say, well, just if it's working, I'll do some more. But starting a new contract will be more difficult, and that's likely to continue. As was already stated, continuity planning and the need for a diversified labor pool, is really come home. We saw that in COVID, and now we're seeing again because of the Ukraine war. So large firms are saying, well, all right, I want multiple locations. So I guess the answer is Ukraine's not in a good position to attract new contracts with new firms. It is doing a remarkably well good of keeping the ones it's got and extending them. Now, again, the longer the war goes, or if it gets more intense, then that could change. But I think everyone is being, at least many people are being delightfully surprised by the continuity they're getting out of the Ukraine right now. And again, there's the desire to support the Ukrainian people, which is very intense.
And being involved, obviously here in Ukraine, and taking on what Peter just said, what about you? If you were a CEO in the West, you've obviously seen boots on the ground here in Ukraine, how they're coping. What would be your opinion here?
First of all, I totally agree with the point that Peter mentioned about the cost of risk. So everything that ends up and starting on budget point of view, if somebody would propose me an awesome budget, maybe it can cover the risk, but I also believe that in future we will have more and more what's called divided teams. So we'll start new contracts with at least the majority of team located not in Ukraine, maybe some supportive roles. So of course, managerial roles and anybody who have access to the personal data, they must be located elsewhere. But particular activities we can still successfully complete in Ukraine.
We're coming to, it's kind of almost inevitable that there's going to be some kind of economic crisis. Who knows how obviously bad that's going to be. With that in mind, how will wages, how will the salary change around the world due to the economy state now? How's it going to change around the world, specifically in Ukraine? What do you think?
Well, right now wages are rising. That's the clearing mechanism between an imbalance between demand and supply. You raise prices, right? And so in general, tech, engineering, and IT wages are rising much faster than inflation, right? And that's a global phenomenon. It's happening in Europe, it's happening in the US, it's happening in India, and to a lesser degree in Ukraine because of these other constraints. People are happy to keep their jobs, but that fundamental demand imbalance of demand supply will create upward pressure. Now, that it is going to be harder to do that if we move into a recession, right? So wage inflation tends to slow, though it's really a factor of competition for specific resource, for skill sets. So for example, product management, data science, deep engineering will continue to likely be in demand, right? And likely those wages will likely continue to raise well above inflation, even in Ukraine. It's just a factor of demand and supply. And, so we could be wrong, and there could be a time where there's excess demand over supply, and a really deep recession could put that there. It's unlikely to last very long because of the pressure building in this digital transformation and just how much tech talent is going to be required globally to convert these companies from their traditional industries into tech companies. It's just astounding. So I think, if you're a young person out there listening to it, this is a great industry to be in.
Okay.
From what I can add, at least about Ukraine, I believe that I'm fear about it, but I think that until the end of war, we should not expect for the major race. So we need to be happy at least to get stable, whatever we started with. So that's the point, which also might be from what I mentioned in previous question, in answering previous question, that's the point of signing new contracts. For those clients who will be really limited in budget, Ukraine must be the last point to get good engineers.
An important aspect here is Forex currency, right? And what happens to the different currencies? Because often the currency changes overwhelm any particular wage inflation, or it's unlikely to be deflation. It will be inflation. But the Forex issues really often drive whether a country or location is attractive over time, right? So if you can make it now, if we could predict Forex, we wouldn't be on this call. We would be sitting drinking grape being served, because you can make a lot of money at that. But those Forex issues are going to be really dispositive moving forward. So if you have a point of view that a country at war, currency is likely to go down, then likely the Ukrainian labor pool will be increasingly attractive.
When talking about more outsourcing, okay, how do you think how will it affect the outsourcing in Ukraine? We were talking there, so Peter, you said we are in huge demand of engineers, of good engineers, and I saw one of your interviews before where you were saying that Ukraine has high engineers which have already established, they've already had the time to work on what they're doing here. So it would take another country, another place, more time to develop to that. So my question here really is, how do you think it's going to affect outsourcing? Can Ukraine hold on to this position where it's one of the leading countries in the world for outsourcing IT?
Well, it depends on the war. I mean, so far it's doing a great job, right? So I think we've answered this question a number of times, but huge dislocation, yet the industry has proving far more resilient than was anticipated. As I said, it depends on the nature of the war going forward, how much risk is perceived in the delivery system. So right now, it's holding on to its customers, and although those customers are setting up alternate delivery capabilities, which over time could affect the long-term prospects, given the quality of the team. If risk drops because the war either stabilizes or goes away at some point, likely it will come back. But if this war draws out if the risk increases, then it'll be harder and harder for those for both the delivery to continue and the and for people to feel comfortable putting mission critical functions into a war zone. But right now, it's actually quite amazing how well the industry is doing.
Yeah. Peter, may I ask, because I remember one point I missed. You were answering a couple of questions before, and you mentioned were like dev teams and DevOps teams. And I'm interested in general, like, first of all, are you separating them like software engineers, hardware, and DevOps? And what do you think is most likely to be popular and raising, at least this year? And like, I'm interested from the point of person there,
Sure.
because we were thinking about DevOps team and division one day.
Well, look, the future is DevOps. Okay, as companies move into agile, right, and they move into wanting persistent teams that both operate and run, right. So that's going to take a larger and larger share of the marketplace. Right now, it's only a portion of the marketplace, but it's the fastest growing. And it's also one of the reasons that make Ukrainian labor so attractive, because of the stability, vis-a-vis other areas, and the deep technical chops that tend to come with those teams, and good language and other issues. So now, that's not to say there isn't this traditional marketplace, which is roaring along, right? But if you think about in a recession, people will tend to go to the more efficient vehicles, the ones with higher productivity. What's DevOps? DevOps is, we've done studies in this, and a good agile team running in DevOps can be sometimes 500 times more productive than a traditional waterfall team. 500, okay? So forget what you're paying your people. If you're that many times more productive, so the bang for the buck and the effectiveness of those teams is much better. So if I'm giving you advice, you definitely want to be making investments in agile, DevOps, and those mechanisms, which is how the tech community is evolving into. That said, there's still a great deal of work left in the more traditional structure. I think what the big challenge for likely you is, how do you sell those persistent teams? Right, and how do you uncover those opportunities? But they're definitely there, and that share of that marketplace is growing.
Let's start with this one. So the successful first quarter of this year, of the Ukrainian IT industry. Is that partly due to obviously the war starting on February the 24th? It's quite a lot of time that had already passed. Would that be fair to say that that was the reason as to why it's still been successful throughout the war? Because I'm hearing the Ukrainian IT economy is still thriving. We're still able to battle the war. But is it because we're seeing statistics which have helped push from before the war? Or is it continuing to be this strong?
Well, my perspective is look, your point is the war didn't start. You had half the quarter already delivered before the war started. So, and companies have been reluctant to take contracts away. And as we already stated, it's been close to miraculous how well the Ukrainian firms have and capacity have in delivering even in this situation. Very heroic, right? So I think that momentum has carried them through. We can see that based on that momentum, companies are still not taking the existing contracts away. It may be harder to add new customers, and customers are. It takes time for a customer to stand up new capacity, particularly of the quality that is in they were getting out of Ukraine. So and they are doing that, right? And we'll have to see what happens, in future quarters as that capacity comes online. But it's actually very hard because there's a shortage, right? There aren't experienced engineers elsewhere in the world for it to go to. Okay, so I think it's much easier said than done. But over time, that capacity will come online, right? And it's really a function of, can the Ukrainians continue to deliver well and find ways to manage risk, as we've already talked about. They have splitting their teams that lowers the threat profile or risk profile, doesn't diminish it completely. And as I said, there's a lot of sentiment in the world to support Ukraine. Okay, so people will likely give them an extra chance in this environment.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. From what I'm seeing right now, what's happening? Yeah, first quarter was so successful because we passed the half of it. And what we've seen right now is what called like the long tail in statistics. So we're still seeing how we close deals that with whom we started before war, like any kind of communication. And the farther we go, the less new contacts we're receiving.
Yeah, that makes
Basically,
sense.
what
It's
you're
just
saying.
viewed as risky. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's going to continue. It's going to become harder and harder. You really got to look at bookings other than revenue, right? And what's the pipeline look like? You know, that's less visible to us in research. And we are seeing, and what we can see is firms standing up alternate, or trying to stand up alternate delivery. But that's hard. They're struggling to do that. Now, in a recession with less demand, they will find that more easily. But again, that's multiple months of effort to, you know, I mean, it's taken years to build that delivery capability in Ukraine. It's going to take years to build it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Who is profiting from the misery of Ukraine? Obviously, in every crisis, in every bad situation, every war, there's always someone who profits. Where is, if the new work is not going to go to Ukraine, obviously, it's not going to go to Belarus, to Russia, these markets being closed. India hasn't got the engineers. Where else is it going to go, which will still work with people's plans, projects, timetables?
India doesn't have the experienced engineers at this point. They can bring in thousands and thousands of what they're called freshers, young people out of college. They have to retrain them, but it takes time to bring them through. You can only get someone with 5 years experience after 5 years, right? So just it's a statement true to itself. Look, I think the major beneficiary is is increased the biggest beneficiary are tech workers around the world whose wages are rising faster because of the intense shortage. Look, it's been an amazing 2 years for anyone who's a service provider. They've had an amazing run because of this. You know, their stocks are down right now because of the anticipation of a recession, but their earnings continue to be, well, their earnings are growing because of the growth. They're likely the profit margins are going to drop because they seem to be unable to pass through the price raises. So, you know, but again, look, 200,000 people out of the global supply chain, if that's what happened, right? And the people out of that would be Ukraine, Russia, and Belarus. And when I say out of the global supply chain, we've got a company here that's continuing to deliver, but certainly we've had hundreds of thousands of people come out of the overall global supply chain as this war has progressed. That just intensifies the demand, right? And so it's been a really great year, but it would have been a good year anyway for these service providers, right? So I'm not sure there's a company that's like, wow, we're so glad that happened. It's just been, you know, another 5 knots of wind in an already strong gale blowing into the waves, into the sails. So, you know, I just don't really see it that way. And again, it's been amazing how well the Ukrainian industry has stood up under this sort of under this war. It's just been almost miraculous.
I guess it always comes down to, Anna, you can obviously back me up here, obviously coming down to obviously Ukraine being in a war for the last 8 years, people being ready for this, people having their contingency plans ready, and the ability to move to somewhat safer place in the West, in the western part of Ukraine. Some people, females, being able to go abroad and continuing their work. And like Anna said, 2 days, where people took 2 days to kind of what's going on. And then people want to get their minds off of what's going on and then just concentrate on their work. And that's what Ukrainians, from my perspective, what I've seen, have done. What is the likelihood, I've got 2 questions here, guys, on this. So what is the likelihood of kind of the threat of Ukrainian engineers leaving the Ukrainian market and going elsewhere because they want certainty themselves and they're not sure if there's going to be a future in Ukraine? Is that a high kind of risk, or is this something that we're not really thinking is going to happen? At the moment, they can't. Many guys can't. Some females can, of course. But
well, it's hard to leave your home country, particularly for a good job, right? But we're seeing that happen, right? We're seeing that diaspora move. You know, we're seeing them set up dev shops elsewhere. You know, we have this whole work from home has prepared us for this. So, you know, and to some degree, I think even the companies would encourage that, which is they'd like to split their operations so they can assure their customers they can continue to deliver whatever happens. So, yeah, I mean, people flee wars, and that will always be the case. This is going to happen with the tech group. The tech group's more mobile than any other point in terms of having employment, right? So if you're an engineer in Ukraine and you're able to leave, likely the same company that employed you in Ukraine will continue to deploy you in Poland or wherever you've ended up. It's about personal safety. That said, people love their countries and want to stay if they can. What do you think, Anna?
Yeah, I have the same opinion. Because right now, the majority of men in Ukraine cannot leave country. That's like martial law. But I believe that, yes, a lot of people will leave Ukraine. I know that even now, a lot of them seeking for the possibility, even though it's illegal. But yeah, that's also part of our life. That's why we're asking you about how fast and efficient we can study new one for not to wait in university for 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question there: is do you really need 5 years of university?
Yeah.
I mean, and can you fast track that? But yeah. So look, the longer this war goes on, the worse its effects are going to be.
At the Diia Summit in Davos, yeah. So the excuse my pronunciation, but Mykhailo, Anna, how do you Mykhailo Fedorov? Yeah, is this
Fedorov, yeah.
This one presented a video about Ukraine in 2030, where the IT sector is 70% of the Ukrainian GDP. Currently, the Ukrainian percentage sector is at 4%. Is it realistic? In 2030, how many years is that? 8 years to get up to 70%.
I think any good, because to mention, Mykhailo is a minister of digital transformation of Ukraine. So from what I think, and any good minister seeing his ministry to be the most important, even in a scale of couple of years. So it's more about fantasy, taking into mind that I just checked today, since the very independence of Ukraine, 1991, and up to right now, we have all the same 5 fields dominated in our GDPR. Those are like steel, metal, selling wheat, etc. So I hope we will grow up maybe even a couple of times or a triple, but it still will be closer to 10%, but not 75 at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds aspirational to me. Look, you'd have to have all the other areas completely collapse for that to be the case. Hopefully that won't happen. Mm-hmm. Just the grain alone should stop that.
Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to press the thumbs up button below. Also, subscribe to our channel to make sure you don't miss out on any future content coming your way in the near future. Also, I really want to know your opinion about this episode, so be sure to leave a comment down below in the comment section. Okay guys, that's all for now. See you soon.